Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So what we're going to talk about today is relationships and why they matter. And if you look right there behind me on the wall, that is the Hippocratic Oath, or the Oath of Hippocrates, which is what the doctors take when they swear that they at first will do no harm, and then they go through to say how they expect to take care of people for the remainder of their lives. What I find interesting is even though divorce statistics are improving, people are waking up. Gen Z specifically is seeing great numbers, but it's because GenX had lived through so many divorces as children and then had divorces themselves and have become the generation of majority at the moment and are slower to divorce. There were people that came before us that were married 5 and 10 times. It was a very common thing. And it was a TV trend in the 70s and early 80s where you would see these people that had just all these marriages, one after the next. And, you think about those things, but studies are now highlighting patterns that predict relationship breakdowns. What's great about the terabytes of data that we now collect and the terabytes of informational processes that we now document and see is there are some very true patterns that arise. And what's funny about these patterns is it's something that is old as time. So as we go through them, I've got 4 studies up right now. One is talking about signs that your relationship is doomed. Another is specifically around older men who are responding, older than me, thank you very much, but older men that are responding on what they pull back from first. And then the other is the study that actually highlights these patterns, and it tells you what you need to look at and try to avoid if you want relationship stability. And here's why I focus on relationship and divorce so much. I think we should study it. I think everybody should strive to get married and have a partner in life. That was my understanding of it when I was a young man, and I thought I was doing it right. And you do all you can. At the end of the day, a relationship is still 2 people, and people may not see it the same as you. And so I'm just grateful that my siblings got it right, and I'm so grateful for their spouses, and I think they're wonderful parents, and I think they're wonderful family members. And I have a brother-in-law that's just a fantastic person. Every time I'm around the guy, I'm like, we should hang out more, but we live thousands of miles from each other, so it's not a common thing to have that time available. But the point about it is, one of the prayers that I say most often is for my siblings and their spouses, and then I say them for my nephews and my niece and their future spouses. I pray about that daily. I pray about the possibility of me having a future spouse and what that person is going through, and that God watch over her. And I've prayed that prayer since I was divorced almost 11 years ago. But I say this with this in mind. If you put faith at the center of your expectations, that will help normalize your relationship. And what these studies show is that if you're a Christian like I am and you do things with a Christ-like concern and you try to have that relationship live up to the expectations of the Bible, you'll see that the biblical norms matter to couples and keep couples in better spaces. So one of the things that I think's wild at this day and age is the introduction to OnlyFans and how porn has become so prevalent amongst the younger folks. And I watched a video this morning. When I'm up very early in the morning, I take medication very early for pain, and I watch stupid videos during that time just to see what's going on in the world. And this is a former person who is on OF, and she says that the biggest thing in her world now is she wants to be a traditional wife. A trad wife is the catchphrase. And I'm sitting here thinking, how is that possible? You're missing the very specific purpose or thing that's the most valuable of this traditional wife, which is the moral woman who took care of herself and her purity and made that the most important thing in her life, second to only her God. And by doing that, she is to be treasured among all things. The Bible says a pure woman, her value is worth more than rubies. I did a video on that the other day of what a godly woman is and what you should look for. And the thing is, these days, it's rather hard to find that. It's rather hard to see that because as you get older, people have more baggage. They've lived through things. They've made decisions, and those decisions are worn in their life and what they put in front of you. Just like my decisions are worn with anybody who comes into my life to be a part of it. They'll see that there's a history there. So it's to be understood. But at the end of the day, both male and female, you want to try to keep yourself as pure as possible. I have never seen a culture so bold in the stuff that used to be embarrassing. Like, you should be embarrassed. The other day, this young lady told a guy on a dating show that she'd been with 1,670-something people. And I'm thinking, that's insane. And so the guy said, hey, Google, show me a picture of 1,500 people. And it did, and he was like, oh, my Lord. And when you look at it, it is a crowd. So this young lady had let a crowd do what they do and was proud about it, was saying it publicly as if this was something that should be, if not praised, normalized, but definitely not admonished as something that's bad. So I think that's one of the factors that needs to be called out is promiscuity is far more prevalent today in society as a whole. Now, don't get me wrong. There are promiscuous people always, even in the Bible. There was a woman who was affected by 7 demons, and she was very promiscuous. And they showed that in the movie Risen. Somebody asked about her and said, does someone know this person? And all the men in the room raised their hand, which was humorous. But if you didn't catch that, you didn't know the Bible verses around it. It was humorous because she was a woman of the world. And, Jesus had saved her from her lifestyle and from the demons that kept her in that lifestyle. But now that lifestyle, and a couple things to say out loud, women being in control of their situation and that situation specifically, if they're in that industry, is better because it used to be they were victims of other people than just themselves. So pimps and whatever it may be, Johns or whatever. But today they're victims to themselves even greater because they make these decisions when they're very young and they don't realize how they'll think in 4 years. And so 4 years from now, they are the worst abuser of themselves because their lifestyle will be completely changed because of what they chose. So getting back to the normality of the situation, the reasons people have relationship issues have not changed. Criticism is the number one reason of why people have issues and start calling out their partners. An example of this is how people talk to each other. You always talk about yourself. You're so selfish. That's an example. But if you look at the modern trend, people are openly going onto online sources and criticizing their spouse, sometimes on video with their spouse in the room. And that leads to the next thing. It's contempt. Contempt is the greatest predictor of divorce, and it must be eliminated. Within a marriage, there's no room for contempt. I talk about gratitude and being grateful for what you have in your life, but also being grateful for that person and all that they bring to your life. You have to watch out for statements that come from a relative position of superiority, such as, you're an idiot. You don't ever call someone that matters to you an idiot, and you don't have contempt with them, and you don't try to do them harm. You should think about the Hippocratic Oath. First off, do no harm. I ask all the time, sometimes when I'm speaking with folks, I say, who gets the best of you? Is it your clients? Is it the people that are in front of you at work? Or is it your family? And everyone that I ask that question to, and I ask them to give me examples, they all treat their family far worse than they treat people at work or strangers in the world, which is pathetic. These are the people that cling to you the most, you matter the most to, and you're saying the worst things to them that you would say to anyone. One of the worst statements I ever heard made to a person was by that person's parent. And when I heard that, I had to shut the whole situation down, and I was like, this stuff can't be said out loud. But then secondarily, it can't be thought. So you have to think about those things. You should treasure your spouse. You should treasure your children. You should treasure your siblings. And those people should matter the most, and they should get the best of you. So I've always suggested using a reset of some sort. So if you go to work, for example, when I drive to work, I used to get myself revved up with that by having a cigar on the way. I would say the prayer about, God, please let me say the right things to lead these men. Please let me keep these men safe and send them home tired and a little richer. Please watch out for their families and keep them safe until they return to their families. I would have this ritualistic prayer that I'd say just about every day, because I was a leader of men before I got in front of them in a blue-collar environment, and it was dangerous. The work we did was dangerous. We had the greatest safety record ever recorded, though, and it will stand forever. It will never be broken because those guys were so dedicated to keeping each other safe and to keeping our team safe and delivering the thing that I demanded, which was you go home safe at the end of the shift, a little richer, right? A lot more tired and a lot more smelly, because this is Texas and the heat got up to 110, 115 degrees in that plant. So all those guys respected that, and they knew that I lived up to it. The first thing I ever did was looked at the safety situation, walked around for multiple times a day to see if there was anything that came up, and required that of everyone that worked with me. And so they did a great job of keeping themselves safe and doing that. So in all that, we spoke to each other like we appreciated each other, and that was mutual respect. So this contempt and calling your partner an idiot it's not hard to believe that that would lead to something other than success. Okay, so you should be honest. You should care. You should show that care. You should show that compassion. And the next thing that comes up is defensiveness. This is defined as self-protection in the form of righteous indignation or innocent victimhood that could be an attempt to ward off a perceived attack. An example sentence might be, "It's not my fault that we're always late. It's your fault." So defensiveness, if you're in a relationship, and so as a man, you're supposed to be the dominant person in a relationship. Your wife is supposed to, subjugate herself to your leadership. And in that, you're supposed to protect her, care for her, to do better for her than she would even do herself from a biblical standard, right? God tells us as husbands, you're supposed to love your wife like God loved the church, which was without fail and with forgiveness, right? You're supposed to lead, you're supposed to direct, you're supposed to care without fail. Wives are supposed to love their husbands like the church loves the Lord, which means they're going to fail. They're going to mess up, but they're dedicated. They try to recorrect and be as dedicated as they can. That's biblical. So in the Bible, the expectation is greater on the man because the wife is supposed to subjugate herself, humble herself under his care. So if you're in a situation where you're trying to talk to your wife about something you think is a concern and she becomes defensive, she's no longer being a subordinate to what your direction is, and there's no growth from that. And if you're not doing the things which show with honor that you should be somebody she should trust and depend on in that way, then there's not going to be the trust that's required, and the defensiveness is going to rear its head. And you can find the defensiveness very early on in a relationship when you try to correct somebody and they do whatever they can and feel attacked when you're just trying to have a conversation. In relationships, if you can't talk about what you require and it goes somewhere, so the circular conversations where you're never able to improve anything, that will drag you down into the pit of hell. That is something that nothing is going to improve, becomes abusive for all parties. If you're not going to try to take something away from these conversations, then you're going to have an issue, because it's not going to be fixed. It's not going to have the attention it needs, which in one of the other studies in a minute, we'll mention this again. The last one that it says here, the fourth thing that's awful, it says stonewalling, means emotional withdrawal from the interaction. This becomes an issue when the listener does not give the speaker the usual nonverbal signals that the listener is tracking the speaker. So basically what it's saying is the listener is no longer paying attention. you've lost them. That stone wall is what goes back to what I was saying about that lack of respect, and you're speaking in circles. You're never going to improve from that. So in another study, it says that older men avoid real conversations. As men grow older, they begin to value communication in a completely different way. They're no longer interested in surface-level interactions or unresolved tension. Instead, they seek meaningful conversations that build trust and strengthen the connection. For them, talking things through isn't optional, it's essential. And when you're talking things through, there has to be an expectation, there has to be a desired result. It can't just be circular. One of the first behaviors they stop tolerating is the avoidance of real conversations. When serious topics are constantly brushed aside or met with silence, it creates distance. When it's met with defensiveness, it creates distance. When it's met with stonewalling, it creates distance. Saying I'm fine while clearly being discontent or disconnected doesn't solve anything. It builds a wall. It hinders communication. Therefore, you're not communicating because you're not getting a desired result. Older men understand that no relationship is perfect, and they don't expect flawless communication. I think this is one thing women don't understand. Men don't expect it to be perfect. It doesn't have to be. When I hear about men and women getting a divorce, women are the ones that apply for divorce 80% of the time. And what women don't understand, if you have a man that's married and he's old school, like Gen X or older, his expectation is, I'm with you till we're dead. Right? Divorces are 50-50. They're going to end in divorce or end up dead, right? That was the expectation. Well, now divorce statistics are improving. So the likelihood of a divorce is like 38%. But that means likelihood of death is increased because you expect to be in there till death do you part. Well, when a woman tests that or breaks that, she doesn't understand what she's just done. Because you're taking a man who's a good and dedicated man. And I'm not talking about people that run around. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a man who made it important to get married and is expecting to stay married until he is in the dirt. Okay? When women do things and play games, like play that game about, I want a divorce. They say to their husband they want a divorce. I compare it to a plate. So when you take a plate and you shatter it on the ground, you can pick that up and glue it back together. And it will look similar to what you had before. But it's not what you had before. What you had before was whole, right? It was wholesome. It was pure. It wasn't broken and cracked and run through. So women, when you do that to a man that's a good man, that loves you, is married to you, he's expecting to die with you. When you do that, you've made him a different creature. For you, he may get married again and give that gift to someone else, and then they may live happily ever after, and you may watch that because when you had it, you broke it. And the problem with that is people say, well, you have to forgive and forget. Yes, but as human beings, especially Gen X, we're not wired to forget. We can forgive, but we're going to remember forever. Forever. Okay? So when you are in a relationship, specifically a marriage, to a man that is a good man, a moralistic, Christian, dedicated, loving man. Now, I'm not saying he's gushing and buying stupid stuff at expensive prices and all this. What I'm saying is he sees through the end of his energy, sees to it every single day that you have a roof over your head, right? Clothes on your back, food on the table, the lights are on, have AC and heat, the kids are clothed, their education's important, you got gas in the car, you have a car, right? He's seeing that all these things are provided for you, and it may take every minute of his time to do that. Which if he's a good man, he will be resigned to do that until it kills him. Okay? Because that's what good men do. How do I know? I used to have people working for me from the West Coast to the East Coast, thousands of them, and they were the same in every market. You had people that were players. I had one gentleman that had 14 kids. I was like, how do you afford that? He goes, Mr. Ben, you don't have to pay for them past 10. I'm like, what? So apparently the state, once you have more than 10 kids, the state will just pay for your kids. which that was an education. I didn't know that, right? But then I asked him, I said, well, do you live with any of these babies' mamas? No. Well, do any of these babies' mamas have more than one kid with you? No. So this cat, who was making minimum wage, had that many women lay on their back and get pregnant and give him a kid. Blew me away. Blew me away. But I'm saying this because if you have a man that is Christian and has the morals of a Christian and reads the Bible and tries to lead his family in a way where he expects you to be submissive to his leadership, he expects to lead you in a way that keeps you safe and takes care of you and the kids, then you don't want to do things that play with his soul. And saying things to that guy like, I want a divorce, you're going to shatter something that can't be fixed. Okay? Cheating on that guy, you're going to shatter something that can't be fixed. Lying to that guy, you're going to shatter something that can't be fixed. And once you're out of it, you will realize what you had. But then it's too late because you've shattered something that can't be fixed. Okay? So men want to know that where they stand, even if the truth is uncomfortable. They don't want to avoid conversations that can help things. They want to protect the relationship. They don't want to avoid conversations that are going to slowly weaken the relationship. This perspective comes from experience. Many have been in relationships where issues were ignored instead of addressed, only to grow into bigger problems over time. And what you realize is a lot of these problems, after a couple of weeks and a couple of months, you don't even remember what they were. So the things people fight over a lot of times aren't very important, but it can lead to decisions that have to be made because it leads to different situations that may not be positive. When silence replaces communication entirely, it becomes a problem that no older gentleman will be willing to accept. For older men, real connection comes from openness. They value partners who are willing to express their thoughts, share their feelings, and work through challenges together from a standpoint of love and trust. Not from some accusatory position, not from some defensive position, from a position that is Christ-like and a concern that matters between spouses. After everything we've learned, they know that real love is not silent. It speaks, it listens, and it grows. And so now we're going to the last study in this video. Studies highlight the patterns that predict relationship breakdowns. Key relationship risk factors are identified in new analyses. Why these findings matter and what it means. So cultural discussions on relationships and health of relationships has expanded. It's easier for people to identify problematic patterns like chronic inconsistency, jealousy, and disrespect earlier in a relationship. This awareness allows couples to address these issues before they escalate into irreversible damage. The reporting emphasizes that timely recognition and intervention can improve the odds of maintaining a healthy long-term partnership. That word partner. People like to use partnership intermingling with marriage. Marriage is not a partnership, okay? The Bible says you should be equally yoked, but the man is the leader. It doesn't matter if the wife earns more. That's what's required of a biblical marriage. God has a model. God comes first, the husband comes next, the wife comes third, and then the children. So sometimes husbands and wives will fight over the children because the wife is putting the children over the husband or the husband's putting the children over the wife. And at the end of the day, that's not godly. Godly says God, then the husband, then the wife, then the children. So the wife is to love God over her husband. The husband is to love God over his wife. At the end of the day, if you're doing that, you have a true marriage relationship. It is not a partnership. Partnership is what you enter into in a business so you try not to screw each other, right? in a marriage, the expectation is the two are going to become one. Doesn't just mean one flesh, but in your own mind, you have one set of goals, one set of vision for your kids. You have one life that you are trying to build and sustain together. It says experts link behavioral patterns to long-term compatibility. Patterns such as mismatched goals, the inability to manage stress during major life changes, and breaches of trust like infidelity can destabilize even strong relationships. Well, what do you think? Like I was saying earlier, look at it as a plate. Once you break it, it's no longer what it was. It's kind of like a Coca-Cola can. I use this when I tell people you should not buy a car that's been totaled, because once you stretch a can back out, it will never be as strong as it was before. Crush a Coke can, pull it back out and see if it's as strong as it was before. It never will be. That's why you don't buy a car that's been totaled. That's why you check Carfax whenever you buy a used car, and you only buy used cars. But back to the purpose of the video. Managing stress during major life changes, that matters. I've mentioned before that being a Christian and believing in something stronger than yourself matters because it makes you more resilient. Well, just like that's the case out in the real world, it's the case inside your marriage as well. You want to be resilient. And husbands, you need to lead your wives through these situations so they can leave the stress behind. And as you get older together, that will build trust. One of the things about divorce that's so ridiculous is you have a history with this person. And they're typically your best friend. And you have stories together for decades. And you've gone through tough things, so you know that person's got you. You have all this proof. And then you mess up and screw around and do something repugnant that ends the marriage, changes life completely for the both of you, and then you start all over with this again. That's why people in their 40s and 50s and sometimes 60s now don't want to get in relationships again. It's why they don't want to get married again, because I've already done all this once before. I don't want to do all this again. But at the end of the day, God has a plan for each one of us. So one of the prayers that I say every day, and I've said this since, the day that I decided that I was going to get divorced, I've prayed for my wife, my future wife, whoever she is. If I've met her or not, whoever she is, I've prayed for her every day of my life since then. Because if God's building someone for me, I just pray that he's building me for her as well as she's being built for me. I want to be right for her should that time come. And if it's not, if it doesn't, fine. I'm grateful for everything I've got, every piece of dirt, every blade of grass, every splinter in the furniture, everything I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for the pain and the life I've lived. It's taught me wonderful things. Some things have been hard, but I'm still here. And that's the way your marriage should be. It should be resilient. It should be something you're grateful for. It should be something that makes you stronger as individuals, but also as that couple. Because remember, at the end of the day, in a marriage, you're not two individuals. You are one in the fact that you have spiritually and physically become one under the eyes of God. That's what taking the vows are. The next thing is talking about wife material. It's basically a broader debate on relationships. It says, this discussion in this study says wife material highlights traits such as financial responsibility, boundary respect, effective communication are all essential marriage readiness items. These qualities align with broader research findings that link them to stability in relationships regardless of gender. The overlap between cultural commentary and empirical studies reflects a growing consensus on the behaviors and attitudes that sustain long-term partners. And what I'll say is this, studies identify 6 main triggers behind marital breakdown, 6 recurring triggers that end up in divorce. And we can go through that. It's what we've just said already. But conflict resolution is paramount when it comes to a couple. You have to trust each other. You have to specifically be trying to do the right thing for you both, right? There's no longer individuals. You're both together in it. So you should be able to understand what motivates your spouse, what motivates your children, how you become and sustain the life that they expect, and the commonality. Almost, I say it all the time, your life should be as boring as you can make it when it comes down to the fact that your family and your wife should always be able to count on you. That accountability should be boring. It should be that they know that you're going to show up. They know that you're there for them. They know that they matter more than anything else. And if you're doing that and they know those things, then you're successful, and you will be successful in your marriage. So those are the things that are the biggest issues. Conflict resolution is what stands out. The issues that break people apart are poor communication primarily. 2/3 relationships that fail are said to fail because of that. And those poor communication, that's driven from other things that are basically incompatibilities between the two, because you're still living as individuals. So I went through all that. The damage is extensive if you do not protect your marriage, if you do not treat it like it's the most important thing in your life, then toxicity creeps in. Active listening and focusing on shared goals matters daily. If somebody feels like they're being left behind, if somebody feels like they're being outgrown, then you're failing to have the active listening that's necessary, but the effective communication where they feel heard. And you got to do those things. But the viewpoint and the understanding that we're both in this until death do us part, that's the most important part about marriage. And it's quite simple. Every day you wake up and you know flat out, I'm doing this until I die. And if you get up every day and say that every day, then you should be in great shape. Patterns like constant criticism, emotional manipulation, and a disregard for boundaries are preventable. And if you pay attention to them, you can prevent having a loss of empathy, the loss of mutual respect, and the disrespect for boundaries that your spouse has in place. At the end of the day, there's a lot of counselors and interventions and groups and support that you can get, but all that's outside. There's 3 people in a marriage: husband, the wife, and the Lord. If you're consistently going to the Lord, then other people aren't trying to impact your marriage. One of the things that's most disturbing about the internet is how many women want other women to be divorced and single. If you see any woman post anything about should I leave my husband, the overwhelming response is going to be that she should. No one thinks that anyone should stay in a marriage, apparently, except for the statistics of marriage, which are improving. Divorce is at an all-time low. It was at a record high in the 80s. And then when you come back to look at statistics, the more emotion that's involved in a marriage, the less successful it will be. So when you look at the partners in a marriage, I use that word even though it's not a partnership, in gay marriages, which don't exist in the Bible, gay men have the most successful marriage relationships, meaning they don't get divorced. Next is heterosexual relationships, which end 39% of the time through divorce, because 80% of the time the woman files for divorce. The worst marriages, even though it's not a marriage in the Bible, are homosexual relationships between 2 women. Those relationships have the highest statistical data around abusive households. They physically abuse each other more than anyone else in those categories that I just mentioned. They apply for divorce more than anyone else. So what it shows is when you have people that are regulated by more emotion than what you find in a man and a woman, or 2 men, that matters. Hormones matter, guys. If your hormones are out of control, and ladies have more hormones they wrestle with than men, they have more emotions than men because God built them that way. It makes them better caregivers and better nurturers. And men are less like that. They're not going to respond emotionally, typically, because God made them that way so they could be better providers and have thicker skin and handle more abuse, because the men are supposed to go out into the world and take the beatings. And the women are supposed to stay home and protect the home front, keep the home fires burning, is what it used to be said. Protect the children and teach the children and make sure those children are going to be the best people they can be in the future. And it takes two parents to do that. It takes the father and the mother, all submissive to God, right? And that's the best case situation, the best case scenario for children. And how do we know this? One, the Bible tells us that, but two, so do American statistics that we've kept since the 1940s. So the faith is right. The statistics support it. All these studies we're doing, they come back to the same thing. The relationship is a system. Rather than labeling anyone as certain things, you have to be mutually accountable for care, love, and repair. And you don't take it so far to do something that's going to damage you permanently. You stop things and you become each other's biggest fan, and you stay that way. And you shouldn't say anything more negative to your family than you would say to a stranger. Remember what I said earlier. The majority of people say the worst stuff to the folks that are supposed to be the most important to them. Okay? So hopefully this stuff is useful to you. Remember to have an attitude of gratitude. Remember to stop criticizing. It says emotional manipulation. That shouldn't be something that's present, because their emotions should matter to you greatly. Their opinions and their viewpoints of things should matter to you greatly. You shouldn't be trying to manipulate them. You should try to give them a sense of security and support, because they understand that you understand what motivates them. And then it talks about boundaries. The most important boundary that a married couple can have is the boundaries around your family. You don't need the opinions of the world. You don't need the opinions of other people. Friends shouldn't be involved in those conversations. It's God, then the husband, then the wife. After that comes the children. Everybody else is outside of that paradigm. They don't come into that. It's you and yours. Hopefully you like videos such as this and subject matter such as these. I read a ton of these studies because I find it interesting that, as old as I am, everything I've ever studied that's been written over time comes back to say the Bible is right. We know how to do this. How do we know? Because the Bible tells us so. I'm Ben. Be good.